Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we're looking at another monitor from Viotech, one of our new favorite display companies. Over the last year or so, I've checked out a lot of products from Viotech and I've been consistently impressed with their value proposition. So I'm hoping today's review of the GFT27DB ends up in a similar story. So let's get the basics out of the way. The Viotech GFT27DB is aiming to be a flat TN version of their curved VA GN27D. So specs are pretty similar. We're looking at a 27-inch panel, 1440p resolution and 144Hz maximum refresh rate. This monitor supports FreeSync with low frame rate compensation, and I can confirm it works perfectly with both AMD and NVIDIA GPUs. With this new monitor opting for a TN panel instead of VA, gamers are treated to a flat display, which I personally prefer at this size, but there's a few other key benefits here. This is not your standard crappy entry-level TN. Instead, this is what appears to be a brand new high-end TN from AU Optronics. It's actually wide gamut. Viotech claims 115% sRGB, which is very rare for a TN, plus it's native 8-bit, another rarity for TN panels. The goal here is to mitigate some of the known color issues with TN displays while still providing all the speed benefits such as fast response times. It's an interesting direction to take TN panels, but one that does make sense because the two technologies known for their colors, which are IPS and VA, are struggling to hit the response times of a good TN. So if you can get a TN to the same level of colors as an IPS or VA, it brings it back into calculations for a lot of buyers, and I'll talk extensively about how this panel performs in a moment. But before that, let's talk about the Viotech GFT27DB in particular. It comes in at the same price as the GN27D, so $330 US, which leaves buyers with a choice between TN and VA at that price point. The GN27D is currently the cheapest monitor in its class, but the GFT27DB isn't quite the cheapest 27-inch 1440p 144Hz TN. That crown goes to Pixio with the PX276. However, the Pixio option is using an older TN that isn't wide gamut, so Viotech is essentially offering potentially better color quality for about $20 more, so that could be quite an attractive proposition for some people. The design, like most of Viotech's monitors, is pretty simple. Fairly cheap but minimalist plastic is used for the main monitor section, complete with a matte display coating that's slightly grainy but not unusually so for a TN. Bezels are slim, the three-pronged stand is built from metal and looks pretty good, and aside from a very basic red light on the back, there's not a lot of gamer style, which I very much appreciate. As with all simple designs, there are some limitations. The stand only supports tilt adjustment. If you need height adjust, you'll have to either purchase a VESA mount or opt for another monitor entirely. The stand is also quite wobbly, more so than a typical monitor of this size. While the general build quality is fine, if a bit unamazing, the stand's instability does make it feel a little bit cheap. That said, it's not going to move around on your desk once you put it in place, especially if you have a sturdy desk. For ports, all standard stuff here, one DisplayPort 1.4 and a generous 3 HDMI ports, including one HDMI 2.0 port, plus an audio output jack. There are a pair of built-in 2-watt speakers, but they are, well, completely rubbish in case you were wondering. Seriously, they are so bad, I don't know why Viotech included them. The other complaint I have in regards to the design is Viotech's continual use of 4 buttons along the bottom edge to control the on-screen display, rather than a much easier directional toggle. Combined with the wobble in the stand, it's pretty hard to navigate the OSD while you find features like cheek crosshairs, picture-in-picture, and color controls. And it's worth mentioning that FreeSync is disabled by default in the settings, so make sure you turn that on. As for the panel itself, well, my main concern going into this review was viewing angles, as it continues to be the biggest issue for TN monitors, particularly at the higher end of the TN scale. I've got to say, this is one of the better TN displays I've seen in terms of viewing angles, especially horizontally, where there is some contrast shift, but it isn't too bad. However, vertically, yeah, there's still a significant change in contrast from viewing it off angles. You really will still want to view it dead on and make sure you have it tilted correctly to get the best experience. So while it's good for a TN, viewing angles are still several steps behind a VA and especially an IPS panel. The other area where TNs tend to suffer is in contrast ratio, though again, the GFT27DB is on the upper end of the TN scale here with this new AU Optronics panel. Native contrast ratio is a touch under 1000 to 1, sitting around the 970 to 1 mark, which is pretty much as good as it gets for a TN. And this is in line with IPS panels, but it does fall well behind a typical VA, where you can expect more than double the contrast ratio for something like the GN27D. Brightness though, it all checks out. In fact, this monitor significantly exceeds Viotek's claims. They list a 220 nit peak brightness, but in reality it performs well above that. I recorded a maximum brightness of slightly under 350 nits, which is pretty bright and a good result for a TN. Response times, they are clearly the big selling point of TN monitors. You buy one because you want it to be fast, and fast for gaming in particular. Viotek claims a 1 millisecond response time with overdrive and a 3 millisecond standard response, which I have to say holds up pretty well with what I found during testing. The optimal overdrive setting here is the maximum high mode, which does have a small amount of overshoot with some transitions, but it was within our tolerances and shouldn't matter all that much. With this mode enabled, the average grey to grey transition was 3.38 milliseconds, and that's a typically fast result for a TN, putting it well ahead of VA alternatives. With the absolute best VA sitting above 5 milliseconds on average, with 8 milliseconds a more realistic figure, this TN is noticeably clearer with less blur and less ghosting in fast motion scenes. The general behavior of this TN isn't anything unusual either. Rise times are much slower than fall times, with an average rise of 4.91 milliseconds that's impacted by a relatively slow black to white transition. Fall times are lightning quick though at under 2 milliseconds, with some transitions hitting that 1 millisecond claimed figure. In general, the panel is much faster than the needed 6.94 milliseconds for refreshing at 144 Hz, so you are getting the full benefit of the high refresh here, combined with good clarity, and those things aren't necessarily guaranteed if you go down the VA option. Input lag is also very good. I recorded around 4 milliseconds of latency, which when combined with the fast transition time makes the GFT27DB a very fast monitor. You'd expect this from a gaming focused TN monitor, and Viotek has certainly delivered here. In terms of color performance, this TN really punches above its weight in a few areas. We're getting a comfortable 100% sRGB coverage, but it's the 92% DCI-P3 coverage that really impressed me. That's not quite at the level I'd expect from a wide gamut professional monitor, but it is a few percentage points higher than many of the wider gamut VA panels I've tested recently from Samsung. Those panels typically clock in between 85 and 90% DCI-P3, so for this TN to beat that is certainly quite impressive, as most TNs are not wide gamut whatsoever. Native 8-bit support is also great to see, considering many TNs are native 6-bit and use FRC to achieve full 8-bit support. Unfortunately, Viotek leaves this wide gamut support unclamped, which means that without calibration, the display is oversaturated when viewing sRGB content. And sRGB content is 99% of what you'll view outside of professional workflows. If you love or don't mind oversaturation and extra vibrant colors, well, that's great. This panel will look amazing and pretty close to what you'll get from a VA, but if you're after accuracy, unfortunately out of the box, the GFT27DB won't deliver. What I'd really like to see, what I recommend for all wide gamut monitors, is a simple switch in the on-screen display that toggles between an sRGB and a wide gamut state. Viotek doesn't provide this, and the result is a default saturation delta E average of 3.18, along with a color checker delta E of 3.43. Grayscale results are a little off as well, with my unit having a slight red tint out of the box, along with a delta E average of 3.60, although gamma is pretty good. If you're wondering about DCI-P3 accuracy, Viotek doesn't really deliver here, with delta E's between 2.5 and 4.0 for the most part. Again, it seems like the panel is not really calibrated at all at the factory, which is typical for a Viotek display and many gaming monitors in general. Were this for professional work though, I'd definitely be expecting better results. Without the ability to clamp the gamut, there's not a whole lot you can do in the on-screen display to improve performance, aside from some minor tweaks to correct the white point. To get accurate results, you really need to perform a full calibration, which as always I did with the help of my good friend SpectraCal's CalMan 5. Aside from a couple of outliers, this calibration led to good results with delta E averages below 1.0. However, like with a typical calibration of a TN or IPS display, its contrast ratio did drop to around 900 to 1. A minor drop, but it is worth mentioning nonetheless. Patreon members who are interested in the accurate display profile I created for this monitor can download it, links to that in the description below. Lastly, we have uniformity. Performance here is decent, better than your average VA panel, especially those that are curved, but it's not perfect. When looking at this chart, there's basically two blobs on either side of the panel with a slight dip in the center and around the edges. Unlike a lot of curved VAs though, there's no noticeable vignette effect, which is a good thing. Overall, I think the GFT27DB is a really interesting product, mostly because it's one of those rare TN panels that has a wide color gamut. As Viotech even says on their product page, TNs have this reputation for poor colors, but this TN in particular is probably the best I've seen in terms of its color output. The wide gamut does some of the work. In its default state, it will be oversaturated, more so than a typical TN and in line with today's VAs, which allows for either 92% DCI-P3 coverage for those that want it, or vibrant sRGB if you're into that sort of thing. But it's the true 8-bit panel and especially the better than usual viewing angles that contribute a lot as well. It's in all three of these areas, bit depth, viewing angles, and gamut, the TNs usually fall behind, but AU Optronics and Viotech have focused a lot on improving these areas and the results have really paid off. And this is without impacting response times, which are still as fast as you'd expect for a TN. This panel looks pretty close to a mid-tier IPS if I'm honest. It's really only in viewing angles where an IPS pulls ahead noticeably. For a TN, I'm genuinely very impressed with the image quality. But when you combine the viewing angle issue with a contrast ratio of under 1000 to 1, you're still not going to be getting a VA-like experience with those beautiful deep blacks. Contrast and viewing angles are definitely very good for a TN, and I think will be fine for most people, but for those who love VAs, I guess you probably should still be sticking to your VA. The GFT27DB also runs into the standard set of issues with Viotech monitors. The stand has limited adjustability and is a bit wobbly, the on-screen display is hard to control, it's not calibrated and there's no sRGB mode, and it's not available outside of a small handful of countries. While I do spend a bit of time on calibration in my reviews, most gaming monitors also don't come calibrated, so for me, that's probably the least important issue. I do really wish Viotech would expand into the European and Australian markets though. So would I recommend this monitor and who would I recommend it to? Well, it's an easy recommendation for those that want a fast gaming monitor. It's 1440p and 144Hz with FreeSync, which I still feel is the sweet spot for PC gaming in 2019. And because it's a TN, ghosting really isn't an issue. Combined with the best colors I've seen for this type of monitor, it's basically the best gaming TN on the market right now, so kudos to Viotech for that. Despite being a unique monitor in that no other company is using this panel yet, at least as far as I can tell, I don't feel it's overpriced either. At $330, it's the same price as Viotech's equivalent curved VA, with both the VA and TN each having strengths and weaknesses. The VA still has superior colors in my opinion, but the TN is flat and is faster. Both are fantastic value though, so which option is better really depends on what you want out of a display. Just don't immediately dismiss the GFT27DB because it's a TN. It's definitely a lot better than most TN displays of the past. And that's it for this review. If you're interested in this monitor or some of the others mentioned throughout this review, there are links in the description to check their current prices. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it or found it interesting, and consider subscribing for more monitor reviews. Plus you can support us on Patreon for some cool perks if you want to. Guess it's really up to you on that one. And well, I guess I'll catch you in the next one.